Thank you, Corey. Wow, that was an introduction. Holy cow. Anyway, thank you. I'm very grateful to be here today. What a beautiful venue to be able to present. My name is the only one on the beginning slide, but I want to suggest that this is a team of people to make this research effort possible. Just like to introduce a couple of those and acknowledge them. Scott Jackson is the upper left. He's the National Carnivore Lead for the Forest Service. In the middle is Joe Holbrook, who is a professor at the University of Wyoming. Top right is Tavis Forrester, who is a wildlife biologist at the Rocky Mountain Station in Missoula. And the bottom is Jake Ivan, who's a research scientist at Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And left lower is Lucretia Olson, who's an ecologist at the Rocky Mountain Station, also in Missoula, in the same office I'm at. And then this is just a crew from 2023, but we've had probably 120 technicians. And I have to acknowledge that they're the ones that have collected all the data to make all of this worthwhile. So it's all dependent on their hard work. So I want to start on a personal note, and that is that when over 30 years ago, when I first got my first natural resource job, it was on the Wapiti district of the Shoshone Forest. And so I started in that cabin, and that was shot 7 days ago, so the cabin is still there. And so, and there was a Cody resident, Larry Sabatka, who was a mentor of mine. He was a district biologist on the Wapiti district of the Shoshone, and the Shoshone's our oldest forest in the country, established, I think in 1891. And so I value that, and also another person I value is I got to spend time with Slim Wright. And he was a Cody resident, cowboy, horsepacker, outfitter, and wilderness ranger. And I value the time of riding horses up on the Beartooth, sharing a bunkhouse up the South Fork Ranger Station up on, the South Fork of the Shoshone River. And so I just value the time that I got to spend there. So I know a little bit about Cody country, and certainly grateful to be here today. I had a kind of a chronology of my study, and it was really boring. And Lucretia Olson, who I just introduced, made a much better version of the chronology of this whole project. And so I have to go through this. I started out this program 25 years ago. Since that time, we have 64 people years of research, about 400 Lynx years represented in our research. We've captured about over 1,000 Lynx captures during the time I've done this, and over 200 individual Lynx. We've collected over 250,000 highly accurate GPS locations. We've written 41 publications and still counting. Our data has averted a couple lawsuits, and we've worn out lots of snowmobiles, and we managed to burn one of these snowmobiles to the ground. That one. So on today's talk, I'd give you at least a mental roadmap of how we're going to structure the talk. First, I'd like to provide just a really general overview of Lynx ecology. Then I would like to talk about disturbance. First about fire disturbance, then beetle impacts, and then human disturbance. So, an overarching goal of what I operate under is how the challenge of conserving snow-dependent species in a changing climate. It's a conservation issue worldwide, and I kind of want to start on that big scale because it is a global issue, certainly. Canada lynx, and most of these pictures were shot on our project anyway. Canada lynx were listed federally as a federally protected species under the Endangered Species Act in 2000. And we know a great deal about Canada lynx thanks to the decades of research done by Canadian scientists and also about research projects across in the continental United States. They were listed just in the continental United States, not in Alaska. And so we know a great deal about the habitat needs and how to direct management. But what we don't know a lot about is how do you manage disturbed landscapes in a way that might increase the persistence of lynx populations, how they respond to disturbance, and then how that might be, how you can use that information to further their conservation. Lynx, as their name implies, are mainly in Canada. And we're interested today just on the southern extension of the species range. And so they're in Alaska, Canada, and we're mainly interested in the continental United States populations. This is a map that we produced. Lucretia Olson was the lead on putting this together, but our whole team was involved. And this is a map, a depiction of lynx habitat in the northwest United States, including the Greater Yellowstone. And so red is good quality habitat, blue is poor quality habitat, and this is based on our studies of 93 lynx across this entire region. And then we tested it with hundreds of independent, like genetic locations, photographs, other things to make sure our map was accurate. Lynx, just so you know, this is Missoula, Montana, and the best lynx habitat in the northern Rockies is from basically north of Missoula up through Glacier National Park over toward the Kootenai National Forest and the Purcell Mountains, and also in the Okanagan in Washington. That's where there are truly breeding populations of lynx in this region. I'm going to talk about Wyoming here in another slide, and we'll focus in on this area. So, lynx habitat is small, spatially, and is patchily distributed. Everything about lynx, you have to understand snowshoe hares because they have such a close tie with snowshoe hares. About 96% of their winter diet is snowshoe hares, and only a small amount of red squirrels is a part of their diet. And so, in the northern latitudes, lynx have this, and hares have this 10-year cycle that's very predictable. Here, in the northern Rockies, there's no evidence of cyclicity. They're both stable. Here I just want to stress, looking at their paws, lynx are highly evolved for hunting snowshoe hares in deep snow. So you have this, fairly small cat with mountain lion-size paws that act as snowshoes so they can pass through deep snow. Also, lynx are restricted almost to spruce fir forests. So this species lives in mesic, kind of cool, high elevation spruce fir forests. And these forests in the winter have what we think of as, there's a lot of conifer boughs touching the snow surface, and we call that horizontal cover. And both lynx and snowshoe hares are highly dependent on forests that have high levels of cover. And the reason for that, the reason for lynx anyway preferring that is because snowshoe hares do, and they're tied so close in their diet. And one thing about snowshoe hares that are unique is that you can actually estimate their abundance by counting fecal pellets. So it gives you a quick way to assess population numbers. It's about the only species you can do that on. And as horizontal cover increases, gets higher, hair use gets higher. And so the higher the horizontal cover, the more hares and lynx require that. That's important because in a disturbance context, that's affects how fire management and land management of keeping areas like that around. Lynx produce about 2 to 3 kittens a year, and they're born in May. They stay with their mother all through their first year, their first winter. Most litters, like I said, are very small. These are about a month-old kittens, these pictures. But sometimes, this is a mother And you can see this was shot just last year, just on near the Bob Marshall Wilderness. But there's 4 kittens trailing behind their mother, and so sometimes you get larger litters. So the maximum we've seen is 6. Lynx, lynx I think benefit from mosaics, landscape mosaics of different structures of forests. Some young, some advanced, regenerating, 20, 30-year-old forest patches, and some old forests. But one thing that's important is about the proclivity or the ability of a female to produce kittens is related to the amount of mature forest in her home range. And so about half their home ranges typically are mature forests, and that seems to be important to their ability to produce kittens. Just wanted to reference that there are other felids, cats in the northern Rockies. One's bobcat, small feet, about the same weight, 23 pounds for, about 22 to 25 pounds for males, about 16 to 18 for females. And they're about the same weight, but lynx are taller and longer legged. And then also cougars, which are much larger animals that are feeding on ungulates. Cougars are important to lynx because they are a major mortality factor. About a third of our lynx in Montana are killed by cougars. I want to just talk a little bit about Yellowstone because that's where we're at, and to bring it down to home here, lynx are very rare in the Yellowstone ecosystem. It's probably one of the rarest mammals, if not the rarest mammal in Yellowstone. If we're focusing, this is that map I showed previously, but zoomed into the Yellowstone area. Just want to make a couple points, and these are the data that you used, which are very sparse, to train this predictive map. And like again, red is good, blue is bad, and the in-between's kind of halfway in between. It's it's a habitat quality map, basically. The best quality habitat in Wyoming is in the Wyoming range, and then also on Togety Pass. And like right now, there's major fires in Togety Pass, and that's being impacted right now, some of the best habitat in the state. Here we are in Cody. Just notice this whole area around Cody is fairly poor quality lynx habitat. Bob Oakleaf, who is retired game and fish, he was the head of the non-game program, was ahead of his time, and he started being interested in trapping lynx and learning about lynx in Wyoming, early in like 1996, I believe. And in about 2000 and 2001, they asked me to trap this lynx and put it on a satellite collar. And this is in the Wyoming range, and each year, this is the same animal in different years, but each year the animal did the same walkabout every summer across big part of the greater Yellowstone, several hundred miles of walking across this, and we don't know the reason for that, but did those repeated movements. Saw lynx near Burl Hot Springs once in 2007, and most recently there has been a lynx that was documented in Wyoming file recently in a photo, and we have some also other recent videos. So lynx are present in the area, but they're exceedingly rare in the greater Yellowstone. Science truly does matter in species conservation. This is a record of different disturbance factors that affect the amount of lynx habitat. And wildfire, this color, prescribed fire, and then cutting. And when lynx were listed in 2000, so you see that before they were listed, fire wasn't even an issue. It wasn't something that was affecting their distribution very much. After that time, fire is the issue, and it completely dwarfs the impacts of cutting or of prescribed fire. And I know Monica Turner provided a great talk to this forum earlier about the effect of climate change and fire disturbance. So I won't go into that, but I want to just set the stage just for this talk for just a couple of slides and say that, the forests that lynx depend on, spruce fir forests, have been impacted by, beetles and fire for thousands and thousands of years. That's how they've been really structured. But what has changed, and this is based on paleo records, that the fire burn rate now in subalpine forests, and this is in the southern Rockies where this work was done, is higher than it's been in 2,000 years. And we're out of the range of variability that fire typically burn in this area. Also, there's an increase in fire severity. So not only there's more burning area, but the severity of fires are higher than they've ever been. And so, you know, the fires that destroy property, endanger human life, you've seen in California, and that affect wildlife and wildlife habitat, including lynx, is increased dramatically, eightfold increase actually in fire severity. And also, as we have a continued rise, and also based on that severity, you're also losing forests where they're converted to open meadows from forested landscapes. We also, with continued rise in temperature and drying, subalpine forests, the ones that lynx depend on, you know, they have Engelmann spruce trees and subalpine fir trees, they're particularly being replaced by more fire-tolerant species, lower elevation species of trees. So you're losing spruce fir forests. With the collars we put on lynx, they obtain an accurate location each hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so that is, and what this does, it provides us, this data provide a window, a lens that we can ask lynx, essentially, have them tell us how they move, their behavior, their habitat selection, and in this case, how they respond to disturbance. So it's very powerful. And then we use all these location data and some GIS, you know, mapping type technology to build models that predict how lynx use landscapes. So it all starts, we kind of invented this trap, wrote a paper on it, just a PVC trap with chicken wire that is a big box trap is how we catch lynx. This way they don't fight the trap, they're just sitting in this trap and they're safe, you know, they don't hurt themselves. We then chemically immobilize the lynx and get genetic samples and also attach the collar. And then we let it go, and it takes about an hour, the whole process, by the time we chemically immobilize the lynx and then let it go. And we always wait till it's fully recovered before we open the door to make sure it's safe and it can deal with predators and other things. This is the kind of the same study here I was talking about. This is the Bob Marshall, there's Glacier Park, Upper Libby, Montana. Missoula's down here. And so just looking at fire impacts on our study area. We talked about fire increase nationally, but it's also expressed on this study area. And for today anyway, we're talking about immediately post-burn, and immediately I mean 3 years after the fire, before there's been a lot of regeneration. The regeneration is small. And just how lynx respond immediately after a burn event. And I would like, first of all, this is how lynx are oriented on landscape before any disturbance. So these are home ranges. These different colors are different animals, and there are thousands of locations on top of each other that are, and these are for males and these are females. And so male home ranges don't overlap. They're territorial. They do not share space with their neighboring male. These are females. Each female is defensive of its home range, but males overlap females. And so that's how they're typically oriented on a landscape. So here we had 25 lynx that we studied before their home ranges had fire impacts, and 27 after the fire impacts. And so we're looking at the kind of behavioral response to this pre and post disturbance. And so it's the same place physically, the same home range, but with different animals, because this is a very long time frame. But it's the same places that we're considering. And so we're looking at questions like, do lynx move at different speeds? I mean, how do they respond to fire? How do they respond to fire severity? Because that directly affects management. And so these are extra home range movements. And this is before their habitat is impacted by a fire. And so only 2% of the time are they moving outside their home ranges. Once fire impacts their habitat, about 12 or 13% of the time they're moving outside their home range. And so there's a real difference. The distance traveled per outside home range movement is much higher. They also travel a greater proportion of the time, like I just said. And when they're traveling at the same speed that they do in home ranges before a fire, but they have a lot more rest stops. And so there's a cost. And what this actually means, I don't know, but it just is true from what we've documented. We're trying to figure out what it actually means for their conservation. At a population level, lynx avoid fires. And I showed this slide to a fishing buddy of mine in Missoula, and he said, that just looks like a bunch of dots. I don't even like that slide. And so I'm trying to convince you that this is actually a cool slide, and it's not just a bunch of dots. So let me walk you through it a little bit. Each of these dots is a GPS location of a lynx, and this is just in the animal's home range. And this is the perimeter of the fire that impacted that animal's home range. The color here is the severity of the fire. But you can see, in general, lynx are avoiding their fire within their home range. So in general, lynx avoid fires. In fact, there is, the more fire, it varies from like 10% to 80% in animals' home range. The more fire is, the more they avoid it. And so it's called a functional response. It's a nonlinear response. So the more it's present, the more they avoid. So lynx tend to avoid fires. But what they do is that you can see that this is lynx locations in fires. And you can see lynx are highly specific in how they use force, very sensitive in how they use force condition. And so you can see lynx essentially avoid any high severity fires. And so where it's severe, lynx avoid the habitat. Lynx are restricted when they use fires into these low severity areas. That's why it matters on how severe a fire burns from a lynx perspective. And so, like I said, these locations provide a real lens into how lynx actually use these landscapes, and that can be really practical from a management point of view. Like if, communities are very sensitive to being able to salvage trees after a fire because they've already had a huge impact, they want to be able to run mills and that type of thing. People at Forest Service can use this information to salvage trees, but also do it in ways that's sensitive to lynx at the same time. And so it's kind of a problem-solving data to be able to do that, and that's the goal of our work, really. The lynx also avoid or preferentially use these islands of unburned vegetation, unburned vegetation in the fire perimeter. And so here you can see these green tree islands are islands that have not been burned in the fire, and that's important because a lot of management would like to use those, like you burn those islands because they're easy to burn for controlled burning and also for cutting. And so we're just saying that not only are these islands critical in recovery of the forest in burns, but also they're certainly preferentially used by lynx. And so we wanted to know why. And so this summer we've been trapping or quantifying snowshoe hares in these islands, and we found that hares are way more abundant in the island versus in the forest all around the island across fires. And so I don't quite know why that is, but that's certainly why lynx are doing what they're doing. They're just picking these honey holes. And these islands are, 90% of them are about 3 acres in size. So a lot of them are small, and some of them are up to 20,000 acres in size. But 70% of all islands used by lynx are about 60 acres. So that does have a lot of import to how you would manage a burned landscape for Canada lynx. We are observing a conversion. We talked about it earlier under those climate slides, that in parts of Montana where I study, we've had a conversion from spruce fir forest to early lodgepole pine, like at 100,000 acres at a time, so at a huge scale. And so the question is, does this matter from a management point of view? Do lynx do well in that kind of environment, or does it matter at all? And so this is a whole other study that I'm not going to go into today. We're just doing it right now. But we've been backtracking lynx during the winter. Also have telemetry, trapping lynx in these environments, and asking that question to say, how do you forage in this kind of landscape versus an intact forest? And that has impact about how you should manage that, at least from a lynx perspective. Should you be thinning it? Should you be reburning it? Should you be doing other things to break up these 100,000 acre stands of trees so they're less vulnerable to subsequent fires? And those are the questions. And this is also in Montana on the Swan Crest, but looking at this landscape, this whole thing has been converted, as far as you can see, from the spruce fir forest by the mountain edge to in the foreground, all into the spruce fir, into lodgepole pine. So I just wanted to, there's a couple questions. What are the central questions that affect lynx that we're trying to address at the Southern Range Periphery? One question is, how do we increase forest resilience? And then this is, defend communities. How do you make forest burn less? How do you increase forest resilience while also sustaining lynx populations through space and time with increased disturbance? That's one question, and can't answer these right now, but these are the scale of questions we're thinking about right now and trying to address. And related to that is, how can you use management to defend elements of old forests, like these patches of green forest that are retained on the landscape? How do you do that given climate risk and climate change? Because these are refugia for lynx too. And so how do you do that? And that's really one of the central questions, is how do you use active forage management, like cutting, burning, other ways to try to defend habitat from a disturbance and climate change. And so, a spruce fir forest, you don't thin them like you do a lodgepole pine, like a ponderosa pine forest. And so it's more of a question of structuring and repatterning. And so, that's a whole suite of questions and research that we're working on right now. There's been also, shifting to beetles in Colorado, warming and drying climates also changing how beetles impact forests. There's been a sharp increase in beetle impacts. And so it's a major impact across Alaska and Canada and in the Southern Rockies, for sure. And because of that, there's been a great deal of effort to try to address it. The infrastructure bill that was passed has about $4.5 billion in it for treating forests risk. Between 2022 and 26, I believe, there is that money for doing fuel reductions, control burnings, making fuel breaks, trying to defend communities from this increase in fire that we're seeing. And that's certainly valid thing to do given the risks that we're seeing with climate impacts and fire risk. But, from a wildlife perspective, there's winners and losers. And like we said, how lynx use habitat, you can imagine that lynx are probably a loser from, massive types of forest alteration like this. And so, between 1999 and 2007, 218 lynx were released in Colorado as a reintroduction. And mainly down here, this is the San Juan mountain range of southern Colorado. And in this area, spruce beetles killed about 95% of mature spruce trees. And so this is different than fire, because here fire, it's a spruce fir forest, the fir still persists. And the spruce has high mortality, so it's different than a fire impact. But it's, and these trees that were killed in the San Juan, a lot of these trees were 200 and 300 years old, and some of them 600 years old. So, there's been a long history of beetle impacts in Colorado, but this was at an unusually large scale and severity. And so to understand, and there was a perception that the forest has changed, the trees are dead, so it's no longer lynx habitat. And so we said, well, let's test that and see if that's in fact true. And so we went there and we were asked to actually go to there, and we trapped lynx, put on collars, and then we noticed we trapped, and this is the light yellow is spruce beetle impacted forest. The dots are lynx again, and you can see just casually, well, beetle killed forests are certainly still lynx habitat. They're using it, and therefore you have to figure out how you manage it in some intelligent way. And so, and this is really related to the Rio Grande forests in southern Colorado, because they were getting sued on this, that they didn't know how to take care of lynx, and so we got data to provide to address that situation. And what we found was surprising, is that lynx disproportionately, this is what they used, lynx used compared to what was available in their home range. Lynx disproportionately used areas with lots of dead trees, which we didn't think that would be true at all. They kind of preferred areas with a lot of dead trees mortality, and this is Engelmann spruce and subalpine fir, areas with a lot of Engelmann spruce and subalpine fir in the understory. And so, so if you're going to log it, and you have to think about how you take care of the subcanopy, and there's ways to do that. Winter logging, there's other things to do that. We also, we built models with many variables, not just these, and build models to predict, again, red is good and blue is poor quality on the Rio Grande forest, were relative to beetle kill, specific to beetle kill, so that lynx, or so that the forest could say, okay, we're going to manage our salvage operations, tree salvage, in areas that have less impact, and when we're in these areas of higher conservation value, we can modify our silvicultural prescriptions in a way that lessen impact. And so it just reduces impact to some degree. We're shifting again now to another disturbance. This is human-caused disturbance. This is Copper Mountain in Colorado many years ago. $150 tow tickets standing in that lift line. I'm glad I live in Montana and ski in Montana. That's all I have to say. But, because of this, a lot of people are doing this. Backcountry skiing and backcountry to get away from those kind of crowds. And also there's a huge interest in, both on-road and off-road snowmobiling. And the question that we were asked is, how do lynx respond to recreation disturbance? And so to do that, we kind of collared both people and lynx this time. We had a GPS unit that recreationists could carry. This is all totally voluntary, of course. And then we also collared lynx in the same recreated landscapes. So, cars would come up to a parking lot, technicians would walk up to the vehicle, they had snowmobiles or they had skis, and say, hey, would you be willing to carry this little GPS unit? And you're helping with a lynx study, and when you're done, just throw it in this, bin, and we'll give you your track as a reward. There's no financial reward, but if you want to do that, we'll give you your track, which was hugely motivating. People loved having their track sent to them. And then we had no record of them. It was completely anonymous. I have no idea who had what track. People said that people wouldn't cooperate with that. 85% of all recreationists, motorized, non-motorized, everybody cooperated with the study, and they were hugely helpful, which was gratifying. So it was very, very high. Our participation was extremely high, and it was supported by snowmobile industry and by ski industry too. These are tracks in the San Juan mountain range of skiers. This is how, so skiers are climbing up mountain peaks, with skins on the bottom of their skis and skiing down avalanche slopes. That's really severe skiing. But that's how those skiers are using that area near Silverton, Colorado. Backcountry skiers. And in the background, you see those orange are snowmobilers. And so they're restricted not to this. They can't do that. Skiers can. And that's all snowmobilers back there in the orange. Here's back in that orange area we were looking at. This is Mullis Pass near Silverton, Colorado. But you can see these are all snowmobile tracks. We collected thousands of tracks. It's probably the largest sample of how people move through landscapes in the winter. And so these are all snowmobilers, and these are lynx dots. And so you're starting to see, how do lynx and snowmobilers parse out the landscape? And I like this slide because it kind of illustrates this all, the issue anyway. This is Vail Pass, Colorado, right here. The green are what we call hybrid recreationists. They're people that are using snowmobiles to get elevation and then skiing. So they're snowmobiling up, you can see the road, and then they're skiing down. This is a hugely important, rapidly increased type of recreation in Colorado. The blue are backcountry skiers. The orange are just snowmobilers. The dots are all lynx, and the different colors are different animals. And so you can just see that here on the top of Vail Pass, there's kind of a de facto ski area that has no name, you know, but has the snowmobiles or the lifts, essentially. And they're using this, and the question is, how do they parse out landscapes? And so we were interested in that question, because they do share the landscape. I mean, lynx can certainly deal with recreation. And so to illustrate how we approach that, just like we did in kind of the other studies, it's similar to the other maps. If this is the landscape down here, you can see these are lynx locations on that exact landscape. They're very specific in how they use it. You wouldn't see that in a coyote or a wolverine or grizzly bear. I mean, they're very specific in how they use forest condition and slope and all that. They're out of the valley bottoms, they're off the high elevations, and they're in these side valleys. And so we build models based on that to predict, make a predictive model of how animals use this landscape. Red is good, blue is bad, as you can see how they use this landscape. And then this is it for the whole southern Colorado, basically. We found that models that have just environmental features are less effective than models that also include recreation. So recreation did have some impact. And so this is my last data slide, so try to hang in there for one more data slide. I want to make sure you get your money's worth. And so here we go. And we'll just focus on one box at a time. So these are, what we did is look at, this model had many variables at the same time, but we have a technique to look at how recreationists and lynx respond to the different environmental elements. So let's just focus here on canopy cover, because it kind of relates to horizontal cover. So as the amount of canopy increases, see recreationists, and these are different recreationists, hybrid snowmobilers, backcountry skiers are blue, lynx are black on all of these. And this is snowmobile off trail, on trail. These are just generally snowmobilers. Just kind of think about all this as being motorized recreation. The blue backcountry skiers and the lynx are black. And so at low canopy coverage, all recreationists are like the landscape, and they decline as the canopy covers increase. Lynx are just exactly the opposite. As canopy cover increases, lynx use the habitat more. In slope, lynx use steeper slopes here compared to all the recreationists. North slopes, both backcountry skiers and lynx use the same north slopes, and motorized recreationists stay on south slopes more. And so, and I would maybe just do one more here. In road density, backcountry skiers all the recreationists are near roads, essentially, compared to lynx. And so what that means is just simply, it allows managers to say, how can you manage lynx and recreation on the same landscape? How do they divide out the landscape? And it's clear that if you change canopy coverage, you're going to increase change in how people recreate on landscapes, and you're going to change how lynx use landscapes. So just to illustrate that point. This is Copper Mountain again, and there is an upper limit to how lynx use, how they respond to recreation. This is the ski area. You can see that lynx generally avoid it. So recreation at this level is too high for lynx. And they use it, and they use the ski area more in the off season when the ski area is closed for when it's on, and then they also use it more in the summer than they do in the winter when there isn't recreation. So I just want to end by saying, what would I like you to remember and take home with you following this talk? And one thing I'd just like to remember is that lynx are, highly specialized forest carnivores that are dependent on snowshoe hares, and both depend on spruce fir forests. I said, although I also like you to remember that although these forests have been structured by disturbance for thousands of years, we're in a different place right now. The disturbance has changed, climate has changed, and the disturbance has changed, and that's an important issue for lynx. A third point is that science has, I think, an important role. Science does matter in that it focuses conservation to be both effective, affordable, and focused by having an informed perspective to conduct management. And there's a huge issue now on how you try to increase forest resilience to fire impacts for communities, human communities, across the West. And what do you do about that? Well, I think, you can certainly with controlled burning and cutting, and all those are important actions. But if you want to try to do that in a context that also allows lynx to persist on a landscape, it can be done. I'm convinced it can be done. It just has to be done from an informed perspective. I think some of these data we can help provide guidance on how you would do that. And then the last thing, I just hope you gained more knowledge, appreciation, connection to Canada lynx from listening to this today. I hope you care about them. I mean, forests that have forest carnivores are better forests in my mind. And so I thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Oh, absolutely, yeah, I'll be here till I'm last person standing.
So I'll run a mic around to anyone who has questions, and we'll turn on the lights so I can see who he's talking to. Audio check, here we go.
Thank you very much for your talk, John.
Yes.
First question, on that very last data slide, and you said generally they use steeper
Right.
north slopes, more cover. Is that because they normally would prefer steep north slopes, or because that's where spruce fir are, or is that, did you mean to say that was primarily avoidance?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, excellent question, and I think it's mainly, I think it's the first you said. I think that recreationists use different landscapes than lynx. Recreation landscapes, snowmobile landscapes are very different than what lynx use, and so I think they naturally partition the landscape just based on how people move through landscapes and how lynx move through landscapes. And so I don't think it's direct avoidance. There's a 10th Mountain Division trails in Colorado that have heavy use by skiers, and there's no buffering. Like, they come right down to the trail, and it's, like, if they were avoiding people, you should be there at night and not in the day. A simple thing, just some simple questions, and you don't see that. And so I don't think they have I don't think they're avoiding recreationists. I think it's mainly habitat associations that are explaining it. And so if you change habitat, you change the relationships until you get to very high levels like at a ski area. And then I think you did have avoidance.
Interesting, thank you. And the other question was, if defining fire severity in terms of lynx, is that percent total burn? Is that percent ground cover or canopy cover burn? Is it all the above?
Yeah, I think it's all the above. It's, fire severity. The low severity has more retained vegetation. Low severity has more retained vegetation that does support more snowshoe hares and is still adequate for lynx. And like I said, the reason they're using those green tree islands, they have much higher hair densities, and we have no idea why that is. We know that it's way higher. There's a lot more hares in those islands compared to the surrounding forests. But I don't know what the mechanism is of that, and lynx are just dialed into that. There's just hunting hares in a small place that they can catch them. Yeah, so fire severity. So when it's high severity, lynx just don't use it at all.
was wondering if you could make a comment or two on the interaction between bobcats and lynx. Is the habitat selection so different they have no effect each other, or when you get big burns and open things up, do you get bobcats moving into that area? What do you know about interaction between those two?
That's a great question, and we're studying that right now. And the way we're studying in that, we're putting out arrays of cameras. And Tavis Forster, the person I introduced at the very beginning, is ahead of this work. Where we're putting arrays of cameras across burn landscapes to see how all carnivores, lynx, bears, wolverines, but we don't get many detections of those, bobcats, mountain lions, are affected by disturbance. And so that's how we're directly looking at that question. Not with telemetry, but with camera, hundreds of cameras taking photos, and really powerful data coming in off that. And so I think we'll be able to address that question. Yeah, I do. I think that certainly in the winter, they segregate. In Montana, we do not see bobcats in the habitat occupied by lynx because of snow depth. Where I saw actually a lot of bobcats with where lynx were was in the Wyoming range. And based on where I've trapped lynx, I saw a lot of bobcats up at higher elevations. And I don't know if they were running on snowmobile pack tracks or how they got there, but they certainly were there. And so, there are some competition, and in Maine, there's actually been some inbreeding, which you don't see in the West. So, I think there could be interactions, but we don't see it yet. I think mainly during the winter, when times are toughest for lynx, there's usually segregation because of snow depth.
Thank you very much for your talk. Considering length of time that it would take to get to a mature spruce fir forest, what are your concerns for the lynx population, and long term, like where do you think that, because in our area you're saying that it's fairly stabilized, do you feel like there's a potential for a downturn, or do you think that there is management possibilities to make sure that that's maintained stabilized?
It's a couple of levels of that question. One is that I think it's becoming increasingly important to try to use active management to defend islands of mature forests at this point in time with climate change. And that's not a thinning problem in spruce fir forests, it's a repatterning problem, where you're putting in meadows, you're reburning, you're changing patterns to try to control existing forests, realizing that they can still burn, but trying to reduce the probability of burn. So I think that's part of the action. The other part of our research is looking how lynx are using these early successional forests. They're using it for sure. And we're looking at like their efficiency and how far they go and their kill rates, and I don't quite know the answer to that right this moment, but they're certainly using it. But that forest is less persistent because those lodgepole pine trees will grow out and will not have any cover underneath it as they grow out and start poling out. And so compared to an old forest with a multi-story layer of vegetation that'll be persistent for hundreds of years. And so, they depend on a mosaic, and the question is how do we, through management, try to maintain this mosaic of structure classes that has some element of old that can carry them through as these other forests mature. It takes about 30 years for lynx to use a clear cut. We studied about 900 clear cuts and how lynx responded to that. It takes about 30 years. It takes about 20 to 30 years before lynx start using fires, really, and where you get this advanced regenerating forest. So, I think there's hope, but we definitely want to try to keep mosaics. I don't know if that totally addresses your question, but that's, I think, where the challenge is.
You mentioned that there is a significant amount of lynx mortality due to mountain lion kills.
Yeah.
Is that due to a potential competition, perception from mountain lions and lynx, or what do you think is the driver of mountain lions going after this mesocarnivore?
I think it's just fortuitous. It's like wolves and coyotes. Where coyotes are caught by a wolf, they're dead probably if they can catch them. and the same thing with lynx. It appears to be, from what we've seen it's not like It's just the lynx is just in a bad spot and just gets ambushed. The lion bites it once and just leaves it and walks away. Doesn't eat it, and it just kills the lynx and walks off. I don't think it's, and they're surely not competing for any sort of food source. So I don't think it's a competition thing. I think it's just what you often see in the animal community of predators killing, smaller predators. Very much like lynx and, or wolves and bobcats, or wolves and coyotes, sorry.
What has been one of the more surprising capture scenarios that you've done with lynx?
What,
That threw you for a loop or challenged you?
well, there was a lynx we called F86 that was one smart female lynx, and she would not go into traps, and so we tried to catch her with dogs, and we've caught maybe 50 or 60 lynx I've treed and captured them with dogs. I remember sitting on a road, 3 of us all lined up looking down in this bottom land, and all these trees, and the dogs are running around chasing and howling and chasing, and F86 just walked. Finally, I looked next to us, and she was right on the road too with us. All the dogs were down there. She had tied them into a scent knot that the dogs were never going to figure out. She walked walked by us and just walked up the road. Like, say, that's what I think about all your dogs. She was, yeah. We had her monitored for like 6 years, but F86 has to come in mind. That was in Montana, by Seeley Lake, Montana. There are, but they're very rare. I mean, and there's no evidence of a breeding population, and that's important to stress. There are lynx. I shouldn't say that. Lynx have produced kittens in the Wyoming range. We had a female produce 2 kittens. The kittens died of starvation, which is common in Montana too. But the kittens didn't persist, but they did produce kittens. And we have on Togety Pass had males and females have overlapping home ranges, but we have no evidence of a breeding population per se in the greater Yellowstone, and we don't know through history. I mean, there's pictures in the 1920s of government trappers in Yellowstone Park killing lynx, just like they did a lot of other predators. So lynx have been on and off in this region for a long time, but we don't know the persistence. And it's very different than you do when you just go up more toward the Canadian border, more toward the Bob Marshall complex, Missoula, Montana, up north of there, where there are, a breeding population of lynx. Very different than GYA, but they are here. Well, I don't know. I mean, I would hope they would, because, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It would be good if we did know. And we have had some recent films of lynx from people having cameras on their private land. And then also, that one picture I showed, that was, I think, from a houndsman, the tree that when they're hunting lions and treat a lynx. And so, that's fine. And we surely would like to know more about that, because I think it is important to certainly track lynx in the greater Yellowstone area, if we can. But it requires everybody's help to do that, for sure. Yes, sir.
Thanks for the talk. Really enjoyed it. I was curious if you could comment on maybe some of the snowshoe hare biology or limiting factors, how maybe the hemorrhagic disease might be a future impact, and also maybe some of the habitat requirements that we're not looking at for snowshoe hare, maybe down woody debris for cover. Are they at risk at more predation if there's not a lot of down woody debris?
We don't see hemorrhagic disease so far in snowshoe hares, thank goodness, like you do in cottontails. And so far that has not been an issue. Snowshoe hare abundance, they are not limited by food per se. Hares don't starve to death. They're all killed basically by predators, usually in very short order. And the issue that, we've looked at dead and down woody debris, and it was not as predictive as horizontal cover, mainly trees, that touch the snow surface. And so that's been more the limiting factor. I don't think there is a limiting factor. They persist in low densities here compared to the north. Like we don't see, like I said, we don't see cyclicity. They go up and down, they stochastically fluctuate, but we don't see cyclicity where you would have enough hares to impact the amount of of food that would affect or increase stress levels that would affect their population levels. So, another one thing that could limit them, and there has been studies on that, is that they're getting more out of sync. Hares change color. So they're brown in the summer and they're white in the winter. Well, they're getting out of phase more and more. And predation is a huge issue for snowshoe hares. And so if you're a white bunny running around the landscape that's brown with no snow, you stand out like a neon sign and be very vulnerable to any sort of predation. And so that is an issue that, with continued, spring's 2 weeks earlier now in Montana than it was even a couple decades ago. As you get more and more off color, out of phase, that could be an issue too, going through time. Yes, sir.
When you said the most of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem is poor lynx habitat, is that because it is objectively poor, like it's the wrong kind of forest, it's the wrong kind of landscape, or do you say that because we just don't find lynx there?
The best lynx habitat in the greater Yellowstone area, like I mentioned, it would be Wyoming Range, going over Union Pass, Togety Pass, and on maybe the east side of Yellowstone Lake. And it's because those areas have the moisture. I know the Wyoming Range is kind of an unusual place. I mean, it has a high moisture content where it has a lot of infill. We have lodgepole pines with spruce and fir is an understory that provides a high horizontal cover that supports hares and can support lynx. Much of the greater Yellowstone area is dry lodgepole with low understory and low hare densities. They've done lots of studies in Yellowstone. Karen Hodges, Scott Mills have done studies and showed that much of the greater Yellowstone has exceedingly low snowshoe hare densities compared to places that support lynx. So I think it's a question. The habitat isn't suitable to support hares over much of the greater Yellowstone. Too dry, too little horizontal cover to support it. Except there are islands that do, and those islands, I would argue, is where we should focus the conservation efforts.
I have one last question from online here, if my phone wants to cooperate. Can you discuss, or are you familiar with new oversnow technology and potential overlap with lynx and how that may or may not change your results?
Yes, when we did the study, one thing over snow technology would be snow cycles, where it's a motorcycle with a track, basically. And so you can drive a motorcycle with a track across the snow in denser forests than you can a snowmobile. And so that technology wasn't really present on our study area, and so we weren't able to study that. But I would assume that when you start using motorized recreation during the winter in dense forests, you're going to have a higher potential to impact lynx. And so that would certainly be one technology that I would be concerned about.
Dr. Squires, thank you so much for your time and expertise.
Thank you.